Let's see. All right. We should be we're probably on now, but I'll let you know. It's gonna say we're not, but when I do that, we are. Let me record this. All right. In case I screw up, we're all set.
There we go.
All right. Hey, everybody. It's Ryan Maloney here at Julio's Liquors. And of course, it's the liquor talking. We have a very special guest with us today and it's scheduled, unscheduled sort of interview. I have Owen Martin, I'm not even going to say new anymore. You've been there 2.5 years. I'm going to be the first one not to call you the new master
Oh, wow.
distiller for Angel's Envy. He dropped by. We got some really cool news coming up. We got some really cool new products coming out. And we're going to try to sort of go through these and see where it sort of lands us. But I know you guys just launched this year the new triples. I figured we'd start there.
Yeah.
First of all, it's been 2.5 years, but how's it going?
Good. Yeah, I think the first year is always an interesting one because you're sort of pouring other people's whiskey.
Right.
And then as you start to get your own releases out that you can speak to, I think it gets easier and you get your footing underneath you. Yeah, I mean, I guess as a more a broader idea, 2.5 years still, like I pretty much function as a blender today, right? Like any of the
Right.
whiskeys we're going to talk about today, 5 years old, 10 years old, obviously we're distilled before my time. And so that's fine, right? But I'm basically taking pre-existing barrels, matching them with finishing casks that I've used, and creating new whiskey.
Right.
But then the distiller track into the topic of new distiller, whatever, that's still, I wouldn't say the other shoe's even dropped yet. So, when it comes to new grain bills, new fermentation, new ways.
Now, have you been doing that though?
Oh yeah. Always.
All right.
Always,
Well,
always.
yeah, you heard it here first.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
screwing around with everything, which
Yeah.
is great. And really, it's the art of the blend. I mean,
Absolutely.
it always really is.
Yep.
And it's been since the inception. I mean, we actually one of the first places we were talking before about having Lincoln Henderson here, and the whole point was. It was from the get-go, it was a finishing and blending project.
Sure. Sure. I would say to me, so again, well, I haven't said it yet, but my training is in Scotch whiskey.
Right.
And so blending to me is kind of just inherent, right? Like finishing and marrying and blending all go together cohesively. And as a finished bourbon brand, of course, we're going to lean into finishing and blending, obviously. So yeah, I think that kind of works for us. I would say it's interesting to me when you look at other spirits industries, cognac, tequila, Scotch, maybe a little less so with Irish whiskey, but everyone's emphasizing the blender. American whiskey is the one that really seems to put emphasis on the distiller. But ultimately, to me, it's kind of the same thing as the person, really ultimately making the liquid decision.
Person responsible for putting the final product together.
Yep.
I mean, but even like, I know you worked in Scotland for quite a while too. It's like that's always, and I always found it funny because it's usually that guy. It really was never the master blender. It was always the distillery manager.
Yeah, if you want to
know what
go
I mean?
even further
Yeah,
back to
yeah.
when the whole advocacy and forward-facing thing didn't even exist, yeah,
Right.
definitely distillery manager.
And as a distillery manager, you're responsible to make sure everything comes like is distilled the same way every time.
Right.
And then changing, for us, it's changing mash bills and all that type of stuff. For them, it's a little bit it's more about the type of where the cuts are going to be, what type
Sure.
of barley you're going to use, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think you could put that either in the realm of distilling or blending. So distilling, it's kind of working with different lots of grain, different seasonality there. How does your equipment run in the middle of summer versus the middle of winter? And then blending's kind of the back end of that with the same idea of different lots of port barrels for us,
Right.
right? Different warehouse locations that the bourbon was matured in. Basically taking the factors that the front end was dealing with, different distillation seasons and whatnot, and then dealing with that years later to create a consistent product. So you're trying to achieve consistency on both ends.
Right.
And luckily you kind of have quality control there, in place.
And
along
then and
the way.
that is at the end of the day, all you can really do on some of this stuff is, the distilling you might have a little bit more control over, but as soon as you throw that in a barrel and Mother Nature sort of starts taking over, the best you can do is sort of like try to control as best you can and then working that into the blend.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's the function of the blending department. I mean, I've joked elsewhere that, there's probably an era where AI could run a distillery to some extent, but blending, at least because it is so human, has that human element, and is sensory oriented and whatnot, it feels like hopefully job security to me.
Well, we get that. We were talking about this a little earlier, and we did a barrel pick today, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. Is that even if you could AI the perfect pick, what is the perfect pick?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because now I said I don't pick a barrel for myself. I
Hmm.
pick it for my customer.
Sure.
And that's a different process of what I'm going to drink, of what I want. I'm trying to find what a vast variety of people will
Yeah.
like. And I think that's so subjective,
Yeah.
that could, to whose palate. I mean, you have a problem with
Yeah.
that now
Yeah. Yeah.
with people picking things because they start picking for themselves.
Yeah.
You run into problems real
I was
fast.
about to say, I'm glad you have that mindset because not everybody does. I think that is kind of single barrel in a nutshell, right? We're looking at the liquor store or the, high-end cocktail bar that wants that barrel, but we also kind of have to look at the end customer that's shopping or drinking at
Right.
those places. So single barrel is a really interesting, almost thought experiment there because you need to have the bounds on it that it is a recognizable profile. For us specifically, it has to have some amount of port, like
Right.
some amount of color, but where are the bounds there while also within those bounds having enough differentiation that you can be like, well, actually, I want an oak forward one, or I want a port forward one. I think my customer is going to want this
Right.
for different applications, and again, a high end cocktail bar is going to have a different application than a liquor store, and so it's been a lot of work to sort of establish those. So now we actually have specs on it that we have a high end of color that we can use, have a low end color, a high end of flavor, a low end of flavor.
Okay. And then
Anyway,
you sort of
yeah,
leave it to the individual of where they want
yeah,
to land.
yes,
So there's, like, that's why the other thing I always say is like most of these things are they, and I guess lifting the veil a little bit.
mhm, yep.
Um, uh,
I'm an open book.
no,
Yeah.
well, like in a lot of places, it depends on how you do it. There's very few places now you can go and sort of just start tapping into barrels and going through. So most things have to be because it's on a bigger scale now. Is sort of like pre-approved,
Yep.
and so it's harder to make a wrong decision, but you can still make one if you don't think about who you want to serve this to.
Couldn't agree more.
So, all right. Well, that being said, and because Angel's Envy has been, the main focus of Angel's Envy, of course, is the port finishing, and that's where you guys have cut your teeth on, and that goes forward. And then we expanded a little bit to the Caribbean cast finished rye,
Yep.
right? It's been a while since we've seen, there's a couple one-offs in there, don't get me
Yeah,
wrong,
yeah, yeah.
but it's been a while since we've seen an expansion of the core lineup.
Right.
But you did.
Yes. I mean,
So where are we going with
that
that?
was one of my early tasks, right? I think that's one of the reasons I got brought on board was kind of kickstart innovation in a bigger way. Again, not to the point where we're just constantly releasing things just for the sake of releasing them. But yeah, like you mentioned, I mean, we're on year 15 and
Right.
launched with that port finish, and we've spun that off into single barrels and cask strengths. So really, pretty much made our whole brand identity off the port barrel as it relates to bourbon. And then yeah, the rum finish rye came. I want to say a couple years after that, so like 2013. So yeah, by the time I got in the door, we'd been essentially 10 years since we'd had a core lineup edition. And meanwhile, you see SKUs on your liquor store shelves. You'll have a
Sure.
brand that has 10 things there.
Right.
So I mean,
And it can be overplayed too. Let's
sure,
not
sure,
get
sure.
into
Yeah,
that. It
yeah,
really
and
can be.
that's not where I
Right.
want to head.
Right.
But I think there's a happy middle ground where we have more than two releases on a
Yes,
shelf, but
that's
we
right.
don't need to be at 10. And so yeah, that thought was like, where do we go from there? There was like this is a great example of how products are created because I get a brief to some extent. They're like, "Hey, I think we want to do bourbon. That's what we're seeing out there." And then to some extent, there may be other fines on that, but this one there wasn't. It was pretty much a white space. It was like, hey, "What do you think we should be
Yeah.
doing?" And then we go back
Well, they
on.
hired you for a reason,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
So yeah, I guess. Well, and we can get in my background later, but yeah, quite a lot of experience in product development and specifically with cast finishing. So yeah, what I would say is that to date, or at least until the date that this had come out back in October, we'd really only played in what I would call the European realm of finishing. And so
Okay.
by that I mean finishing's been around in Scotch for over 50 years now. Right, I think Balvenie Doublewood was kind of the one that really got that going. Obviously, we've been around for 15 years, but I wouldn't say until maybe the last five or so that finishing's been more commonly accepted in U.S. whiskey making.
Right.
Right.
No, I think you're absolutely
I've
correct.
heard a lot of. I've just heard stories of the flack that they got back in the day, Angels for launching.
Oh, it was it was insane. I mean, I think even to get what they got through for the TTB was
Yeah, yeah,
amazing on
changing the
its own,
game, right?
changing the game.
And
And
so
by the way, just as a sort of a side note, I mean, we do a lot of single barrel picks, but we also do projects. And we've been fooling around with what we call micro batching,
okay,
which is just, two barrels put together and finishing. We've been looking for that for a while because we always felt that's where it was going to go.
hmm
And I always use Angel's Envy as the thing. People are like, well, no, I go, listen, Angel's Envy has created a great brand just based on that.
sure.
So yeah, it is possible.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean that even predates our single barrel program. We had
Right.
the special blend program from back
I
in the
was
day.
involved with
Yeah, I'm
that,
sure
which
you
was
were.
great, which was great.
So you probably know more about it than I do, but we have some archives still sitting in my office, dusty bottles from back in the day. Um, but yeah, so like I was saying, so the European conception of finishing is what I'd call it is wine barrels,
Yeah.
different fortified wines, different spirit barrels, primarily rum, but
Hmm.
also cognac, that sort of thing. When I think about until, like I said, the last 5 years, what Americans would consider finishing, it's okay, by law, we have to age in a new oak barrel.
Right.
So we finish in a second new oak barrel, right? Double woods, toasted barrel releases. Clearly, we're not the first to play in that realm, and that's okay. But it's also just it was a complete white space for us. And so for me, I was like, well, as a finished whiskey brand, we should be playing in all aspects of finishing. So why don't we look at that?
Okay.
And again, the last thing I'm trying to do with any release I'm working on is to say I was the first to use this, right? The first to use this crazy wood from South America, whatever. I don't
Right.
really care. I just want to make sure that when we're doing something that is always authentic to who we are.
Okay.
And so for me, it was like the opportunity is to play in a double oaking space. But how, as clearly not the first people to do that, again, completely fine. What do we do in a way that makes it feel Angel's Envy?
Well, exactly. You have to take ownership of it, and it has to be something that makes sense to the general philosophy of what Angel's Envy has been.
Sure, sure. And so that was
Stay
kind
to
of,
your roots, but create new.
yep. And that was it, really. I mean, to go back to what we've kicked off starting about with blending, right? Like through the last distillery I worked at, one of my products that I played around with a lot was combining different finishes, right? So
Mm.
seeing how wine barrels kick off with double oaked barrels, play with different spirit barrels, and really a lot of serious R&D and playing around with that. So, I wanted to be a little bit more intentional with this and kind of keep it again within the confines of a second oak barrel. But I mean, to complete, look under the hood, I initially pitched this product as a rotating oak series. So
Okay.
it would be the same base bourbon as our flagship, but year one would maybe be French oak, and then year two would be Hungarian oak as it played out. Um, and I think in that sense, it was kind of taking a more craft mentality, and by that I mean kind of like a vintage, right? So, you do have like a collectability angle there's positives,
Right.
but again, to be at a global whiskey brand like Angel's Envy, I also think I don't necessarily need to take all the cues from craft whiskey. I can take the handcrafted aspect and
Right.
attention to detail, but there's another idea that I like better, that if you're really good at your whiskey making, every batch should taste the same, right? And so
Consistency.
you're not labeling batch 4, batch 5, batch 6, or in this case, 2023 Angels Envy Oak, 2024 Angels Envy Oak. And so basically what happened was in our afternoons, we'll start tinkering around with blending. Normally when I just get fed up with answering emails and it's time to close the laptop
It
and,
gets earlier and
get to
earlier,
it.
doesn't
Yeah,
it?
well, Friday, it's sometimes the beginning of the day.
Yeah.
And so in that case, I had the different double oaked samples and then just started fiddling around with it because again, that was sort of my background at the last distillery I was at, and found that I was able to start layering those oak profiles together really nicely. And then not only did that satisfy the blending storytelling aspect around that, but really allowed us to own the product as unique to us, right? We're
Okay.
not the first to use French oak. We're not the first to use Hungarian. We're not the first to use Chinkapin oak, which is local to Kentucky and the Ozarks area, but no one's going to have blended those together the way we did. And so to me, it was kind of a win-win in that consistency, like we were talking about, but then
Okay.
also now this is the product that we're owning because it's about the blend and the combination of oak varieties and that sort of thing.
All right. Well, let's, enough talking. We're going to do some drinking here. You can't start. It's after 10 in the morning. You can't drink all day unless you
Just
start in the
barely.
morning.
Yeah, just barely.
So, all right. So explain what exactly this is to people that are listening
Sure.
because they've never had it before.
Yeah, so this has been out since October. I guess just fundamentals out since October. The third addition to our signature series lineup. To me, it fits in really nicely because it's in the middle of the road ABV wise. You know,
Hmm.
our flagship's down at 43.3%, the Rise at 50. This comes in at 46, so kind of
Okay.
occupies the middle space. I would say the flagship has a fairly light, or at least a touch of port as the finish. The Rise, a fairly heavy, sweet rum finish. And this to me is more of that balanced blending mindset. So in the middle of ground in terms of ABV, in the middle ground in terms of the extent of the finish or finishing process, I should say. And then also in the middle ground for price point as well. So coming in around that $65, $70 mark.
Okay.
So to me, it just kind of made sense as well as we got further down the road that it really nicely kind of slotted in and completed the core portfolio. But yeah, to get you the details there, it's kind of fun if you ever are tasting this with the flagship or next to the flagship. It's a really great illustration on the power of finishing casks because it is the exact same 5-year-old bourbon. We have the same spec of blends between the Rickhouse floors of Palletized Warehouse at 5 years right now. We say 4.5 to 6, but right now we're kind of in the
In
middle
the
of about
five, yeah.
5. And really the only difference is we dump, 50 to 100 of those bourbon barrels. And generally, it's empty port barrels showing up any given day. But when we're getting batches of this ready, the oak varieties show up. And so if you're able to taste them next to each other for the first 5 years, they're the same, right? And so really it's a great illustration, not exactly apples to apples since the ABV is slightly different,
Right.
but close enough that
Close
it'll
enough.
show you what a wine finish does to the same liquid as opposed to a variety of different oaks.
So what are you using for the oaks for this?
Yeah, so it's French, Hungarian,
Yeah.
and Chinkapin.
Okay.
And again, I'm more of a, I guess, my past is more in just strictly a production background. Even shoot, as shortly as 8 years ago, I was a night distiller. So
Okay.
I wasn't talking to anybody, let alone going on podcasts in Boston area. And so I'm kind of just more production details, mashing, fermenting, distilling, maturing. But through my career, I've started to work up more into that, I guess, forward facing and marketing world. But to me, that's part of the new fun of being able to flex creativity, creative muscles. In that I'm developing the liquid by also kind of telling the story around it of why I did it, and basically being able to speak in both production language and marketing language and kind of translate between the two. And so for this one, I'll give you some insight into how it satisfies both. So I wanted to just kind of show that we used oak from around the world, but also oak from our own backyard. That seemed
Okay.
like a
Yep.
fun thing to talk about. But then there was flavor attributes to each oak, and then there's scalability as well, right? Like so, we're bottling this. I think we just finished a run. We were bottling it yesterday at the distillery. That took us across the 500,000 bottle mark.
Really?
It's only been out since October, so
Wow.
a little over 6 months. We've bottled 500,000 bottles, which is
That's not bad. That's pretty
pretty
good,
cool.
right?
It's the largest new product I've ever worked on in my career. In order to do that, right, it needs to be unique. It needs each of those
Right.
oaks has to have flavor. It has to position us well. But like, I'm not going to go use, Balkan Black Sea oak and oak from South America or Australia, whatever, because that's not replicable, or at least not on a scale. So those are the kind of background details that go on in a whiskey maker's head
You have
of
to work it. You're working in a finite set.
yeah, and different like we'll talk about some of these other products and their one-offs, limited editions, and
Yeah, but you don't need to worry
yeah, and I
now.
don't
It's
have to
like
think
like
about
you don't
that.
have to think about long term.
Right. Or, or if I do need to reproduce it, whatever, I have a few years to figure it out.
Right.
This is, hey, we're going to be running batches every few months. Like, let's go. And so we worked with both of our main cooperage partners. So Kelvin Cooperage out of Louisville and then ISC out of Kentucky and Missouri. And we're just kind of talking to them as we experimented of like, look, what oak do you have past American oak or just standard white oak? And
And what can you supply a lot of?
and what can you potentially supply a lot of? Because we didn't know how big it was
Right.
going to be when we launched it, but we wanted to be prepared for
Right.
that. And so, we're getting the French and the Hungarian from Independent Stave Company. We're getting the Chinkapin from Kelvin, as you might imagine, being the local
Yep.
or hyper local cooperage. And, pretty much from the day I put that order in, those barrels will show up a month later. So, again, I think it's a great illustration of just all the factors that go into how do you make a successful whiskey that can then scale. And I mean, the hope with this is that we'll be sending it to Australia, sending it around the globe here within a few years.
Well, this is also basically it's a finishing wood,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak,
Yeah.
right? Because you've made the whiskey. It's been 5 years old. That's what had the virgin oak
Yes.
barrels, right? Same thing. And now you're doing these things. When you do this, are you using them more than once?
Yeah, you're asking the right
All
question.
right.
So, Yeah, I'll go back to our flagship with that. So our flagship is mostly second fill, third fill port barrels. I have a percentage of first fill in there as well. But the single barrel you pick is going to be a first fill port barrel. The cask strength we're tasting is primarily first fill port barrels. The reason for that is, we're talking about higher proof
Right.
bourbon. We're talking about older bourbon, so a higher oak content or tannin content. And so we're going to dial the finish up to balance that, right? So
Right.
no matter what, those are the levers I'm pulling. I'm looking at the ABV, I'm looking at the base bourbon age, and then I'm trying to use my knowledge and experience to match that and create a balanced product. With the
Wow.
flagship being down at 43.3%,
Right.
if I used all first fill port on that, it'd come across overly sweet, maybe cloying even,
Right.
but you would have lost, importantly, you would have lost the base bourbon characteristics. So for us, when we, by law, we have to use the first barrel once and only once. When we start talking about finishing barrels, we can behave more like a European or global whiskey company. And by that, I mean fill the barrels as many times as we'd like. So about after the third fill, maybe fourth fill, you pretty much diminished all the flavor. One analogy I like to use is just thinking about barrels like bags of tea. If you're going to steep it, each time you're steeping it, you're getting less color and flavor out of
Exactly.
it.
Exactly.
So for a low ABV offering that's around 5 years old with the base bourbon, second fill, third fill is great. It gives you that, like I said, light finish, that touch of port that rounds out a lighter whiskey. The higher ABV stuff, 55%, 60%, you need more port, or at least to be our profile to be a balanced product. And so I love that you asked about that with triple oak because I think most people wouldn't have even picked up on it. We've already moved into second fills and third fills on things, and so we're still figuring out. We're only
Yeah,
on
because I mean, then it becomes the art of the blend.
yes,
And then you're
exactly.
just picking things to make it
Well, it gives you the whole
proper.
palette to play
Right.
with, right? And especially with this one as a fairly complex product to begin with three oak varieties. And now talking about filling the oaks at different times. A good example there is on our first batch, we used virgin French oak. It was around 20% of the blend. We liked it for that. It gives it nice
Yeah.
body to it, gives it a nice finish and spice profile, but you got to be careful because it's pretty intense.
Right.
So
It
we
can
did
overgo. It can
easily,
overgo
easily.
easy.
And so we did about 4 months on the first batch. It was, I want to say January through April. So again, it really only finished in winter and spring months. So 4 months, had a nice profile, wasn't overly woody or oaky. Then our next batch fell at the end of summer. We had some virgin French oak filled that we ended up not being able to use. I'm holding
It
it
just
for,
went really.
well,
It just
it
really.
was good. It was
It was
just
good,
off
but it's just
profile.
right.
But luckily, what we had done is we had refilled those first French oak barrels or barrels from the first batch.
Yeah.
And so even though I'd had virgin French put down, I pivoted that out and we're still using that for something upcoming that's not going to be triple oak. But when I filled the French oak barrels from the first batch a second time, and they finished for 3 months over the middle of summer, they ended up darker, more
Yeah.
tannic, more oak forward than the same barrels had produced on their first fill. So I think that just goes to show you it's a good illustration of the difference that even time of year makes.
Right.
And that's true of wine barrels, that's true of spirit barrels, but that is certainly true of new oak barrels. Again, the tea analogy, the other one I like to use is if you think about a barrel, it's a little more crude, I guess. It's just a wet sponge. Each time
Right.
you're squeezing it, less color and flavor. But I'd say a wine or a spirits barrel is almost more of like a damp sponge. A virgin French oak barrel is freaking clock full of liquid,
Right. Oh,
so to
absolutely.
speak.
Absolutely. You're going to get a lot out of it. The other thing I like that you're talking about, especially with your sort of your core products, I don't think it depends on what you're trying to do for your one-offs and sometimes we go to extremes. I mean,
Sure.
America's full of extremes, right? From
That's
anything
what
we do,
yeah.
it's what we do. If something has peat into it, we want to get the one with most peat. If we make a beer that has that's hopped, we want to make the most hoppiest beer we can do.
Yep.
And you're throwing these things out of sort of kilter and out of balance, and there's a reason for it. But I like in your core lineup, and I think if you look across the pantheon of products that last and do well across time, it's always the ones that I find that are actually balanced.
Sure.
And especially when you're trying to make a core lineup, it's very important to keep that sort of balance. You don't want like these weird sort of things all over the place because then you're only appealing to a very small segment, and that may not be enough to hold a brand.
Yeah, and I think I deal with this again. You're speaking my language, so like
I'm gonna drink this now.
what I like to say is like you can pour somebody who knows nothing about wine or beer a really nice wine, and they can kind of get it. They might not get it all, but they can be like, "Oh, yeah, this is really nice." If I pour somebody a really nice bourbon that caters to the bourbon nerd that wants a hazmat release,
Right.
if I pour that for my mom,
Yeah.
it's not going to go well. And so, certainly that's a segment of the market that knows a lot and values good whiskey, but it's been interesting to me to see that kind of skew higher and higher proof, which inherently kind of loses some degree of accessibility. And so, not to say we're not going to make that type of release, but certainly as we start talking about some of these other ones, there's reasons why we're doing it, more in the low 50% ABVs and that sort of thing. And I mean, it's also on my mind, like in the last year, we've launched in Australia, we've launched in Poland,
Right.
we were in Singapore.
Now, are those same? Do you keep the same ABVs on those products
We
that are
do.
going
We
overseas?
do.
Because some
We
people
do.
don't.
Yeah, I know that. Well, one, if that was suggested, we'd have some people in the organization slapping me across the face, just for the amount of work that would take. But also, I mean, I like the idea that if you buy a bottle of Angel's Envy in Australia
Wherever.
or Poland, that it's what you're getting in the U.S.
U.S.
And I
Right.
think
No, I
that,
think that's a smart idea.
yeah,
I think that's ultimately the right way to go.
yeah, and consistency, like you just said, I think that plays into that as well. But my mind it goes to that. Yes, I'm absolutely making whiskey for the American palate and whatnot. But if we want to, like you said, have longevity, if we want to aspire to be a global brand, that I'm making whiskey for everybody. And certainly as somebody who came from Scotch world, who came from beer world, like the bourbon world is just one piece of who I'm thinking of. And so I think as a finished whiskey brand, we already have a leg up there.
Right.
I've said it in other settings that if I'm in Scotland, if I'm in England, I'm talking about finishing. They know what finishing is. A lot of what we do day to day at the distillery is still educate Americans on what finishing is, which is
Right.
fine. I mean, like we said, the timeline of it being here is much shorter, so there's still a lot of legwork to be done. But when I'm in Europe, I'm talking about, oh, finished whiskey, Balvenie, Macallan, whatever, and I'm using the finishing as the common thread to then bring them into the world of bourbon. And the bourbon is the differentiator. I'm educating on 51% or more corn, all the stuff that we take for
Right.
granted. US is the opposite. People know what bourbon is, or at least to some degree. So we're talking about bourbon, but then we're saying we differentiate by finishing. And so to me, it's been awesome to go abroad because I kind of changed the way I speak about it. I mean, I get to the end point is the same, but how you approach it is different.
Do you find with this new triple wood though, are you hitting more of the people that are sort of like I want to say
Yeah.
bourbon
No.
purists, but if it says you're only
Yeah.
using wood, they sort of wrap
Yeah.
it. Well, you're only using wood, so I'm okay with that.
You're making this easy, man. You're teeing me up on all these. No, I mean, again, you've pretty much read some of my mind over the last year as we've done this. I mean, I've heard from less so nowadays, like I said, but I think early days of Angel's Envy, bourbon purists all the time. Oh, you only finish a subpar bourbon. You're only smearing flavor on it,
Right.
whatever. Again, as somebody trained in finishing in Scotch, that's the opposite of how I approach it. But are the sort of things that are on my mind of like how are we going to position this? How is this going to be received? And so I was like, well, I was like, okay, if I'm going to be working on a second bourbon, goal one, make the best whiskey you can, no matter what. That's always goal one. But knowing that this is going to be sitting on the shelf next to our flagship port finish, how do I make this as different as possible? And again, talking about the white space of having not
Yeah.
played in oak profiles, but I was also like, I've heard enough people that said, "Oh, Angel's Envy, I love it. It was my, intro bourbon, but I drink 50 other things."
Hmm.
Which is fine. So I was like, okay, how do I bring some of those folks back in the fold? Even or basically, if they haven't had Angel's Envy in a while,
Hmm.
or they are a more traditional bourbon drinker that is maybe not as on board with wine finishing, but double oakings, hell yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's talking about the scaling considerations. That's all. I
It's
think you
all
can
in
see
there.
all the things that are
Yep.
going on in the back of the head of how we make a whiskey.
And the other part of that too, is when we talk about balance and stuff like that, when you start double oaking or you start finishing with wood, you have to be careful because you
Yeah.
can become what we call a one note,
Yes.
and it's all you're tasting is wood spice, and that's not good either.
Sure. And I mean, again,
There's
I'll say,
people that like that.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
get it. But to me, if you like wood that much, pour grain alcohol in a church pew and suck it. I mean, it's just sometimes they
Sounds
just
like
go
a
too.
special release waiting
Yeah,
to
special
happen.
release called church pew. But it's just it's a one note, and I get diving into that. But if that's all there is, then it's sort of boring after your third, fourth sip.
Yeah, and I'll keep saying it. As a guy with a Scotch background, I find a good deal of bourbons to be over oaked before we even start talking about a second barrel.
Right.
And so, a sort of a side hurdle, less so of what I'm considering for the public, but a side hurdle that I like to set for myself is always like what I want to accomplish, what I want to hear when people are reviewing this. And my goal for myself was to make essentially our take on a double oaked whiskey that inherently wasn't over oaked.
Right.
And the way of doing that was to start playing with second fills and different times a year and how we're doing that. And so I think the name almost sets us up for people to expect a super oak heavy, super tannic whiskey. And now the education we need to do around that is that the triple oak refers to the different oak varieties. They're actually all mellow and balanced and
Right.
mashed and layered. And so it's more about showing the nuances and complexities of those than it is about bashing you in the jaw with tannin. So yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
couldn't agree more. So yeah, I wanted people to say, okay, like okay, I get some of the spices from this, that, and the other, but I'm not, sucking wood essentially.
Now you said what's the ABV on this?
46%.
So we talk about 46 magic numbers, right?
Magic numbers, yeah.
92. That's a 92 proof, right? So technically, so what are you doing? Are you filtering or lightly filtering, or are you not at all? What is sort of the because that's when people automatically say, and if
Yes.
you're in the bourbon world, and somebody says, in the whiskey world, period, and somebody
Yes.
says 46, you're automatically thinking, oh, 92. 92 is that number where
Yeah.
you're not going to get sort of the, the clouding and stuff like that. And you're not getting, the congealing and stuff.
This is a great podcast. I love this. Well, one, that you can already read the cues of what's on the bottle and then ask the right questions. But yeah, you're reading my mind exactly. It was, well, approachability, right?
Right.
46 for me. But again, more of a Scotch thought. You've seen like some go from 43% to 46%. So yeah, rough rule of thumb. It sounds like most of your listeners probably know, but 46 is sort of the tipping point. Above 46, you're usually safe of not clouding. And you don't
And
have
there's
to.
nothing wrong with clouded whiskey.
No, no, no.
What's nice is in this day and age, I think we've got, for most people that are in whiskey
Yep.
now, we got them past it.
Yep.
If you see something, if you see that cloudiness, you're always going like, oh, less processed. I
Yeah.
mean, now it's like in New England, we always talked about the fact that we have soda with like pulp in it.
Okay.
All right, you know what I mean? So we were like a little bit used to like it doesn't have to look great to taste great. We
Okay.
sort of got that. But for everybody else and they see that, don't worry about it. It's actually not a bad sign if you
Sure, but
have
it takes
that.
a degree of education,
Right,
right?
exactly.
You have to then do the legwork to educate around that, which
Right.
again isn't a problem, but those are the decisions that have to be made. So under 46%, generally more issues with stability requiring a greater degree of filtration, which again, your whiskey purists can argue is stripping body or flavor. I don't necessarily ascribe to that camp. I've chill filtered plenty of whiskey, not at Angel's Envy, but in past distilleries, I've chill filtered plenty of new products and done them successfully, in my opinion. So to me, it's just a tool that a whiskey maker uses to make a whiskey. But that's just my opinion. I know that
Well,
would not be
here's sort of my take on it too, is that if you know you're going to chill filter something as a good master distiller or something like that, you're already working your way around that.
Sure. Yeah,
So
agreed. Agreed.
you're not going to. I'm not going to strip anything because I know where we're going to end up.
Yeah, or what degree of stripping am I
Right.
comfortable with, and am I blending in other components pre-filtration to sort of play around with
Offset
that?
it
Yeah,
or
exactly.
whatever
Yep.
whatever that is going
Exactly.
on. So
And different types
now
of
that
whiskey
I've said
different
that
types of whiskey are going to filter
differently,
Go on
right.
grain, off grain. What is your grain? What is your barrel? Right. So all it's not simple. Nothing's black or white there.
So what do you think? Where are you at this? Is sort of a light filtration? Are you?
It,
What do you guys really do?
So we don't. Well, we don't have the capabilities of chill filtering.
Okay, so there you go. Unless it was cold outside.
Yes, sure. Yeah, you could put it that way. But we do a plate and frame filtration.
Okay.
A little bit of carbon, generally traditionally from the wine barrels.
Right.
Since we've been wine barrels from day one, that's actually something I'm playing around with, maybe not doing for triple oak going forward. But yeah, a fairly standard filtration.
There's no definition, by the way, people, but I would call that like a light filtration. You're taking out
Yeah,
the big chunks.
Yes, I would say, well, we do even lighter filtration. The higher ABV we go. So
Yeah.
cast strength for us used to be completely unfiltered. That's not something I loved either, but I give it a fairly light, like an even lighter filtration,
Right.
what's called a cartridge filter or a sock filter. So even it's more about that one truly is strip
Taking
out
out the chunks, right.
or you don't want,
You
I
want
don't,
grit at the bottom or anything like
yeah,
that.
and apparently back in the day that was something we encouraged, but again, it's just not how I make whiskey. So yeah, I mean, this one I would say is a tighter filtration, but it follows more or less the same pattern as the core, and the core being down at 43.3 is absolutely in like clouding territory.
Okay.
And we're thinking more in terms of back to global, right? If I'm shipping a bunch of product to Australia, it's going to be on the ocean for months.
Right, and that's below the water line. It's going to get
Yeah,
cold.
big
Blah, blah,
temperature
blah, blah.
swings. So
Right.
that's what I'm thinking. But to me, it was sort of a combination of what are whiskey drinkers trending towards. Obviously, we're talking about whiskey drinkers going or bourbon nerds going all the way up. But I would say even amongst tequila drinkers, even amongst Scotch drinkers, there is a gradual pull of ABV up. So
Yeah,
40,
but I think you're still under 100, so 100
yes,
proofs,
yes,
which is great,
yes,
which
right.
is fine.
And I'm the I guess self-flagellating type that'll go read every single review I can find on Reddit and YouTube and everything else for better or for worse. If I want to make myself feel bad sometimes. But the one that
I need a humbling today.
yeah, get humbled,
Well,
right? But
what are they saying right
the
now?
one and very well received, and I think the sales prove out there. But the one that pissed me off on this one was somebody was like, "This would be a lot better at 120 proof," and I'm like, "Dude, we're not going to sell 500,000 fucking bottles in 6 months at 120 proof."
There's two rules. As a retailer, I can sort of say like there's sort of two rules now of thought. Um, I don't mind higher ABVs, and in a lot of things I like cast strength.
Yeah, there's a
Okay,
time and place for it.
but here's the thing: is I don't drink at cast strength.
Okay.
So if cast strength's 110, I may drink it at
Right.
110.
Right.
If cast strength's 125, I may not drink it at 125 because I'm anesthetizing my mouth
Sure.
after the third
A
sip.
couple drops.
So
a
I'm going to
cube,
bring it
whatever.
down,
Yeah.
and I find that I probably, if I were to actually calibrate it, I would probably say that most of my whiskeys that I'm drinking that are cast strength, I'm drinking between 100 and 110.
Yeah.
If the distiller is saying to me, this is where I think we should be, and it's not a stupid reason, and I've
Yeah.
seen stupid reasons.
Oh, sure.
We go to 86 because 86 runs out. That's the road that runs in front of our distillery.
Yeah.
That's a dumb reason. If it's
Yeah.
like, no, we went up, we went down, we went around. This is what we felt was the best consistently for our product, and you can still mix it, and you're gonna taste it because it's at a higher ABV. Blah blah blah. That's fine. And what's happening now? I've seen everybody's going for hazmats, but there's another camp that is asking for lower ABVs.
I'm seeing that as well. I'm part of that camp.
And it's right in that 100.
Yeah.
By the way, the lower ABVs for people that are asking
It's
for
still
is in
it's still
100. It's still 100.
Yeah, and I'll go back to what you were saying earlier with the advent of huge stouts and everything else like that
Yeah.
that we want to crank it up to a triple IPA, but of all the stupid stuff that beer has trended lately, like I'm tired of seltzers. I don't want your hazy IPA. What I love that has come back is that pilsners and lagers are back.
Beer flavored beer.
Yeah, right.
Love you.
And so that
You can
to
be in
me-
our camp.
Yes, that to me, I mean, I also think that whiskey trends seem to be a few years behind beer, or a lot of the beer nerds then hopped over to bourbon, I guess,
Right.
as well. And so I think that follows in my mind that people want a bottle and bond. They want a lower price thing, a relatively lower ABV thing, and a consistent thing, right? And not one that they can have 3 glasses of and not be floored. So yeah,
But blow your palate.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
can blow your palate really easy. People
Yep.
don't realize people don't realize when their palate's blown, and
Yes.
everybody thinks that they like, oh, I just keep drinking. No, you can't.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you're going to blow your palate.
With our cast strength ones, which is the sneak peek we'll do later, we generally give ourselves 3 cracks at it on an afternoon, and then as much as sometimes I'm moving and grooving, I want to keep going. I want to iterate the blend, pull this component down,
Right.
keep percentages, whatever. I'll make that blend and then I'll put it back in my office, and then I won't.
Well, you
won't
got to
run
do the
next day.
checks.
Yeah.
Did I go too far? Well, let me see if I go too far. Oh no, I did. I'm right. I didn't go too far on that one.
Yeah.
So you
But
do
if I
the
can't
next
taste
blend.
or if I can't taste accurately,
Oh,
then
yeah.
I'm wasting my time.
Wasting everybody's time.
Yeah.
Right.
So I try to limit it. I mean, lower proof stuff, we'll give ourselves a few more cracks at it. But on a personal basis, if I'm blending stuff that are in the 120, 125 range, I need to be
Back off.
cognizant
Right.
that I'm gonna give myself a few, and then it's really not worth my time to keep going past that.
No, I agree
just
with
need
that.
to revisit the next day or the day after, whatever.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm sitting here drinking this as we're going on, and I know we get a lot of other stuff to get to, but
Yeah, we're still on 4-1.
we're on 4-1. Very nice.
Yeah.
The other oaks are adding some really cool flavors going on. I'm getting a little spice from that that French oak is definitely showing up, but I'm also getting some of those vanillas and caramels.
Chinkapin, I think,
Chinkapin
is
from the
reinforced
Chinkapin
out.
is getting that out. Really nice, very, very well balanced, which I'm a huge fan of.
Yeah.
If you're into bourbons, this should be one that you should get.
Yeah, I think it.
And by the way, I'm going to point out one more thing, because people have said that, oh, they're finishing it because they're taking subpar bourbon and they're finishing it. You cannot finish away a bad bourbon, a bad whiskey, period. It's very difficult, and you're going to do a lot more work to finish something away. The best thing you can do is, if it's a bad bourbon, is put it in a bigger batch. I mean,
Yeah.
that's about the best you can do.
Yeah, I think well, actually
But
that's
to tell you
not a
they're
bad.
taking suburban and throwing stuff
Yeah,
in, yeah, okay, that's the flavored whiskey section where you don't really need great bourbon. And
right.
matter of fact, you should still taste the whiskey, even in a flavored whiskey. You should always taste the whiskey. If you cannot taste the whiskey, you would have been better off in a cheaper process to use vodka. But everyone wants to use the term whiskey because it's hot,
Yeah,
so that's a story for another time. But
sure.
but you know, finishing stuff, it's supposed to complement. It's not supposed to hide.
Right. Which is a great segue because the next pour is our first ever unfinished bourbon.
All right, well there we go.
Yeah.
How did I do that? I don't even
Yeah.
know how I did that.
And on that one, I essentially got hired at Angel's Envy because I'm a finished whiskey guy because of the experience I had making finished
Right.
whiskey. And so it was funny to
So the
me.
first thing I want to do
I,
is one that's not finished.
yeah, people, it took a lot of internal, going to bat, having meetings, talking to different departments to get this one across the finish line. But it's been hugely well received since then. Um, it well, I'll back up. Important for us for a few reasons. The first one, it was our first true distillery only release. So
Okay.
we'd had a single barrels at higher proof at the
Right.
distillery, whatnot. We'd never had a unique product that was only available at the distillery
You
until
can
this one.
only get this at the distillery.
You could at first. We did a small launch at a couple bars from there, and then the hope is by the end of this year, we scale
Launch
it
it.
to a national one.
National launch.
But
Okay.
that to me is what the purpose of a distillery only release is to trial something out that maybe is a little bit outside your wheelhouse, to get a little bit more experimental with it, to test. Literally, you can get
Well, you
consumer
get talk about a
insights.
focus group.
Yeah, focus group.
And then
Put
they're all coming
dollar-
to the
and
distillery.
you can put dollars to it at that
Right.
point, right? So I mean, we did a singular release with this one, but in the future we could launch 2 or 3 different releases at the distillery, and if one sells twice as fast as the other two, then that's the one we're going to take and
Right.
continue to
Why
play around
wouldn't
with
you?
and grow. So this has been out since last June. And as I said, we did a small release in a couple markets after that, but really to date has pretty much functionally only been available at the distillery.
Well, this
Um,
will dissuade anybody that says
yes,
you're
right.
finishing to hide
Yeah.
something. Because
Which,
this is quite lovely.
yeah,
It's at the 100 proof, which is
100 proof.
great. It's not overly proofed.
Nope.
You're getting really good flavor. The nose, it's a great finish.
Yep.
It actually is a longer finish than I expected.
Yep. I'll
So,
tell you why that is.
but it's really nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, again, the conversations I have in my head are what keeps me up in the middle of the night that I wake up to. And it's like, the first year at the distillery, we talked about, kind of waiting for my own releases to come out, but it was also just hearing feedback over and over again. Any tour that I walked by, they get to try unfinished Angel's Envy at the distillery, or if they go to our warehouses, and it was like, wow, this is really good. Can I buy this? Wow, this is really good. Can I buy this? You hear that enough times and it keeps kicking around your head, those are the thoughts.
If enough people ask the question, you're stupid not to answer.
Yeah. The last thing I want to do is just ignore it or keep beating our own drum without getting feedback, right? That's why I'm on the in the Reddit comment
Right.
section, seeing what's going on. And so this one, well, one, I want to say it off the bat, was not my idea early. So we talk about having Lincoln here. As it was relayed to me, this was an idea of Lincoln's, which is super cool for me to then be able to execute, coming in years and years later. But as I said, first ever distiller exclusive. Second thing that's important, first ever unfinished bourbon from Angel's Envy, 15 years in.
Right.
Which kind of goes back to the thought as well, is like, okay, if we were launched 15 years ago, finishing bourbon, caught a bunch of flack for it, but now look at any big player in the bourbon industry and there's going to be a finished bourbon in their portfolio. So it felt like the natural time to zag.
Take one step back, but now it's new.
If everybody's zigging, let's zag. So like,
Right.
if we're founded on a radical concept that's now fairly commonplace, my job is to keep the conversation moving.
I think it's sort of a neat thing to do to also, knock down the critics
Absolutely.
about it.
Yeah,
Oh, they're finishing a subpar bourbon. Oh, well, here you
Yeah.
go. Try this.
Yep.
Now, what do you think?
I'll remove my comments there, but yeah, I'll let that is the definition of letting the whiskey
I'll
do the
say it.
talking. Yeah. That's the definition of me letting the whiskey do the talking.
Yeah, exactly.
But the third thing, and the thing that's super nerdy about this, and the thing that I pitched it, is what made it Angel's Envy. Because if I understand right, I think Lincoln's idea was that this would maybe launch under a different brand name.
Moniker or something.
Yeah, different
like
moniker. Was that this is, to my knowledge, the first time a bottle and bond has ever been done at cask strength. And so by that, I mean, we blended about 29 barrels in the first batch. I think it was around 29 for the second as well. And we hit 100 proof on the dot without adding a drop of water.
Nice.
So yeah, a little bit of unique aspect there. And then when you talk about the mouthfeel and the
Yep.
finish, there's reasons for that. There's no water added.
But as you scale up, you'd bring it to 100. You sort of like would do it at 100. You wouldn't be able to hit 100 every time.
We'll see.
All right, all
We'll
right, all
see.
right.
These are the
Challenge
these are the
accepted.
conversations
Right,
that are
right.
happening right now. But I can tell you, I think when you hear that first, it sounds like madness, like 29 different bullet points that were
Right.
all kind, and it's easier than that. So I'll tell you why. But yeah, so basically, long story short, no, this will still be a long story.
Okay.
These are
We got
barrel.
time. I don't go. They're gonna yell at us in a
Yeah,
second
all
anyway.
right.
So.
I'm hanging out. So these were barrels laid down in spring of 2018.
Okay.
The main bulk of it, and the reason why we were able to do this unique product was that we used a low entry proof, so 103 entry proof, spring of 2018.
Okay.
Again, clearly before I walked in the door there, um, and then put them in the bottom of a palletized warehouse. So the most cool, humid environment we really have access to, where it would naturally start to slowly decrease and improve. What I don't know from Lincoln is if the intention was to pull it out right at 100. I don't know. I don't think it
Yeah.
would have been. To me, I'm not, wouldn't have loved that because it's not exactly a flavor driven decision. It's
Well,
like
you
your
know,
86
the barrel
highway
is done.
sitting.
Yeah, the barrel is done when the barrel is done.
Yeah.
It's ready to go. It's ready to go. The whiskey's ready.
Yep.
Again, to artificially sort of say, well, now we're gonna put. Like, no, if it doesn't taste right, you're not gonna pull
Right.
it out. I mean,
So a couple of things there, like it didn't really matter ultimately because it took me probably 6 months of being at Angels Envy to really have the full scope of what different projects were laid down and finally get samples pulled of this and everything. And by the time that had happened, these were down at 98 or 99 proof, so they decreased, 4 or 5 proof
okay,
already. So again, as clearly your audience would know, not bottle and bond because it's not 100 proof. Um, and this is kind of where then my pitch came into it was like, well, actually, the way we then got it back up was bottle and bond, specifies one distillery, one distilling season.
right,
There's no proof other than what's the proof in the bottle. There's nothing beyond that. So even though I was under 100, we still have regular barrel entry proof barrels from that same season. So then I think you can see where I'm
yep,
going here.
you can balance it
And
out.
then also I was able to
There's
wait.
no water added to it. You're just playing with what you're blending.
Yep.
You're playing with the blend.
Yep, and I was able to wait for it to get to around 6 years, which is the point that I felt it really had reached the maturity I was looking for.
And you only have to be 4.
Only have to be 4. So yeah, we were just a hair under 6 on this one, or the first batch. I think the second was at 6, and yeah, it basically becomes a math equation at that point. So it's like 98x plus 122y, which was the higher proof barrels we had, equals 100x plus y, and then you start.
And
Fiddling.
you're already basically choosing the barrels anyway.
Yeah.
So it doesn't
So,
matter.
so in
right.
general, even though we have variation in proof between the low proofs and we have variation in proofs between the high proofs, they still kind of fell into the same camps.
Right. Exactly.
And so really you're only playing with 2 components. So in the same, really, this triple oak's about playing with 3 oak components to achieve balance, and this is playing with 2 oak components to achieve a proof.
Right,
Or
right.
not oak
Good,
components, 2 bourbon
because,
components.
yeah,
Yeah.
because you're basically working with something that technically, because of the way they were stored, especially too, should be very consistent.
Yes, right. They are getting the least temperature
Right.
spikes, right? So, and that goes back to that super soft kind of honeyed mouthfeel to it. It's really a fairly
It's delicious.
low oak profile. It's kind
Yeah.
of sneaky. It's subtle.
Yeah.
It's sweet. It's got some nice creaminess and fruitiness to it. It's a pretty low key bourbon, and as a guy who doesn't skew towards super oaky whiskeys to begin with,
That
like
caramel cream really
Yeah.
comes out.
yeah, so I think both of these whiskeys go to a bigger idea with what I'm trying to make, which is that I should say none of these nerdy details. And if I just pour it for you and you're like, this is tasty, and then you just keep sipping it, maybe ask for a second pour of it. So that's always goal 1.
Right.
Then goal 2 is here's how I made this. Ba, 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 ba. I'll hit you every nerdy detail. What were my inputs? Why did I do this? And so I'm always trying, no matter what the product is, to approach that from both angles.
I think everybody respects transparency.
Absolutely.
You can do whatever you want, pretty much. I mean, proof is in the pudding. You drink it if it's good or not good. It's liquid to lips, right? But if you're totally transparent, you can do almost whatever you want as long as you tell everybody what you did.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
I mean, the only thing really people look for is you hiding something.
Yeah.
And I think by like what we're talking about right now, I mean, explain that. That's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
To be able to sort of do that, I think it's really cool.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. The pitch for why it was Angels Envy, and here's what I had to go to bat for over and over.
Because they thought that this should have been under a different moniker.
Yeah, not even. I mean, obviously Lincoln had passed by then, but it was more our own team and the comfort zones that we were in, and
Right.
we were a finished bourbon brand. And I was like, well, we have a big phrase on the wall that says "Revere tradition, embrace progress," and to me, that has always embodied Angels Envy more so than finishing. Finishing is a big piece of that, and will always be a piece of that. But when I see that phrase, how am I embracing progress? Like I shouldn't be confining myself just to one category.
Right.
And so my pitch and what I think ultimately got this over the line was I'll go back to saying finishing is a European whiskey process that Angel's Envy's innovation was applying to a traditional bourbon industry. So it was that idea of marrying things across category, taking
Right.
something from a different category, putting it in there in an authentic way that had flavor driven reasons and creating a crafted product. So this one I was like, well, let's look at revere tradition, embrace progress and not finishing. But if we're looking at that idea of how are we embracing progress by putting ideas together that hadn't been put together before, I was like, within the bourbon category, we have Bottle and Bond, 1897, as historic as it gets, predates bourbon having a definition, predates the FDA, all this stuff, predates the TTB. Then we have cast strength, which isn't, super, super new, but to all the stuff we were talking about earlier is, I would say, at peak popularity, or I would think close to it,
Right.
as we maybe come back
Hmm.
around to lower proofs. So I was like, let me take what's old and what's new within the bourbon category and put those together. And to me, what's more Angel's Envy than that?
Well, I mean, just the fact that you're doing 100 proof without basically playing with water,
Yeah, and
and
we
is on its own is sort of differentiation
sure.
right there.
We knew it. I'll go full transparency on this. We knew we had an out. So legally, under the TTB guidelines, you can go two proof underneath what it comes out of the barrel at. So we could have dumped it at 102 and diluted it to 100 and still called it barrel proof or cast strength. But again, my side things I set for myself, I wanted to, in full honesty, be able to
Can I
say
do this?
I didn't add a drop of
You wanted to
water.
know if you could do
I
it.
didn't add a drop of water.
Right. You wanted to know if you could do it, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
listen, there's
And
nothing wrong with
and
that.
in the future, right, when we talk about scaling this up to a national release, I have no doubt in my mind at some point in the future we will have to do a small water add within the legal confines of what
Right.
cast strength is to do that. And I will be honest about that when that time comes. But we haven't to date, all the
I haven't
batches
have to
have
do
not
it.
had to do it.
That's
But I
that's
have
really
that.
good.
I have that as an out.
Right.
And I will use it if I need to, but I'm going to do everything in my power to not need to do that.
I think it's really interesting, and I think it's a neat concept. And to be honest with you, that's what Lincoln was all about.
Yeah, I a lot of times I'm trying to think what the consumer's thinking, but there are products when I'm conceptualizing it, I'm like, well, what would he have thought of this? Or like, would he be okay if I position this as Angel's Envy? I don't have those answers, but it is something that I try to at least consider when we're along the road of making something.
I think a lot of the guys, a lot of like sort of the old guard,
Hmm.
guys that I've had the privilege to talk to, Lincoln being one of them, especially Lincoln. I think um, even when he started this brand and his age at the
Yeah.
time, he was never closed minded to accepting an idea or an explanation from somebody else.
Okay.
So we had a conversation once about chill filtration, and he's like, "That I never thought of it that way." He said, "Can I use that?"
Okay.
And I was like, first of all, I'm like, yes, you may use that. But the bigger point in is, and it taught me a valuable lesson that day too, is like never be so set that you don't open your mind to a new idea.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what you're doing here is in what you're doing is sort of plays into that exact mind frame.
Cool.
Don't be afraid to take something and look at it and go, okay, how do I do this? He set it up.
Yeah.
Can you knock it out of the park now?
Right.
Right? And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. I think that's freaking awesome.
Yeah. I'm kind of to spin off what you're just saying, a believer that the more you know, the less you know, right? I think
Right.
there's
You find out you go down rabbit
web-
holes. You go
web-
like, I didn't realize
yeah.
that. Now I gotta retrain my own thinking, and then I gotta also figure how that works into it.
Right. I feel like I've seen a web comic that's like your confidence in what you know, and it starts out low and then it goes artificially high
Yeah.
and then it goes back
That's
down
right.
low. And I definitely ascribe to that. So, I think, yeah, and also talking to bourbon bros, you see people on different courses of their own
Yep,
journeys.
exactly.
So,
Exactly.
but anytime I think this one, and then we'll talk about a whiskey a couple down from here. I'm also trying to think about the conversation I'm having around that, whether it's with whatever education level. So, like if I talk to somebody who doesn't know what bourbon is, I'm gonna have a very different conversation around this. I'm not
Right.
gonna go into those details, but I might go more sensory focused, or maybe just tell them about what ball and bond is, right?
Right.
And that
Exactly.
it's important
Nothing
for
wrong with
us.
that.
It couldn't, no added color, no added flavor. We didn't think we could use a finishing cast to even be in that category,
Right.
and that's why we decided to do it. So it's like I'm a big believer that you also just, no matter what you're doing, dinner, tasting, happy hour, it's a large part of my job is constantly reading the room, understanding who I'm talking to, understanding the education level, and then creating bridges to that to what I'm doing. And that's a
And it's
hugely
always
important
our
part.
job, I think, is to dispel wrong information. And how do you dispel wrong information? By always putting out what's actually happening.
Sure.
That's the best way. Tell
Love
the
it.
truth dispels wrong information. We were goofing around earlier talking about, neck pores and stuff. And it's just like,
hate it.
it's all, but it's like, and we make fun of it because it's like that's humor is a different way to dispel some
That
other
is.
things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
By talking about it, I showed you I had my whiskey thief so I could pull from the center of the bottle, and
Just
it's
for
just
that.
so
Just for
stupid
that person.
just for
Just for
that
that.
person. All right,
Um,
I want to make sure that we get to everything
okay.
because before they start pulling the plug on us.
Right. Before the
'Cause
lights
we'll
get
go, we'll
burned.
just keep, yeah, we'll just
Yeah,
keep going.
I would.
Now the next one we're going to try is coming out. This isn't out yet.
It depends
Or
because I was just in
depends on
I was
where.
just in New Jersey and it was definitely out.
Oh, okay.
But officially, I mean, at that point, you
I'm
just
looking
have,
at I'm looking at our reps out here.
yeah. Well, I think it's down to the
What's that?
distributor.
Yeah.
So we officially are launching it at the distillery on May 31st. I think it's slipped out a few other places, but that's just kind of the nature of the game.
Okay.
So, but anyway,
Well, it's shipping and
it's
there's
in
a
the
lot
middle of
of
shipping. It's going to
logistics.
hit different markets at different times,
Right.
and ideally everything is on the shelf the exact same day, but it never works out
Yeah.
that way.
Let's see that happen.
Yeah. So yeah, this is our first. I guess backing up, our highest end release category has been called Cellar Collection.
Okay.
We've done this will be the fifth one of them, but we actually haven't done one since I think it was early 2022, so a few months before I got hired. And so first Cellar Collection we've done in over 3 years, and then also the first Cellar Collection that I had a hand in pick from. I don't want to say start to finish because I didn't
Right.
again distill it, but selecting the cask, filling the cask with the whiskey I wanted to, and then doing the blend at the end.
Okay.
And so this is rye whiskey, straight rye whiskey,
Okay.
finished for a majority of it for a year and a half in extra añejo tequila barrels. So, I guess I'll go back to the triple oak where
So you're storing it in something that actually took some of its finish from a whiskey barrel, which is cool.
not in this case, but normally I would say you're right. And in other
What was
products,
this añejo stored in?
virgin barrels.
Virgin barrel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right.
But normally you're correct. And in
Yeah.
fact, there's a lot of other products, or I should say projects that I'm working on that are full circle, exactly
Yeah.
what you just described. But just for the sake of transparency, these were new barrels
That's pretty
that the
cool
tequila
too.
barrel got.
That's
Yeah.
different. That's different anyway because
Yeah.
now it's what we call had a full soak
Sure. Yes.
of tequila.
And that's the point. I mean, less so the first fill part of it, but just the provenance of those barrels is a huge part of this product that, we talk about these last two products being more blending focused. And with the triple oak, it was a blend of 3 oak varieties. With our cast strength last year, it was a blend of 2 different port types. This one
That one you didn't put. We're gonna talk.
Yeah,
we talked about that. That one.
we can
that
plug
one
it.
surprised. No, that one surprised me. The last one that came out was tawny port and tawny.
It was still a majority ruby port because that's the
Yeah,
product.
but it did taste different. And I had it, and it was
yes.
like I think Alex is out there, and I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because I'm used to the side of these being just a pumped up version of a regular
Sure.
single barrel, and it wasn't. And I was like, wait, what's going on? Yeah, and she's like, oh yes, tawny port. I'm like, oh, all right,
About
you
a
gotta tell me that.
It was about a quarter tawny
Right.
port. Again, the goal to not change the profile drastically, but to give me
I
another
think
tool
the better.
to give me another tool to layer
Just so you know.
another degree of flavor. And yeah, and on it, well, not to fully zig off what we were just starting to talk about, but the tawny to me was actually like kind of the bridge between the base bourbon character
Right.
and the ruby port.
Yeah,
You have a
you're
more
gonna both do it.
oxidized, you have more nuttiness, more caramelized fruit.
Yeah.
And that bridges the bright red fruit of the ruby port and then the nuttiness and a little bit of fruitiness that the base bourbon had. And so to me, it actually, from a blending perspective, allowed me to layer things together really nicely.
That is a sleeper. If you are out about and you see that out there, pick that one up.
Yeah,
You'll be really pleasantly surprised. If you don't like it and you spend your hard-earned money on it, just send it to me and I'll drink it for you. I'm not going to give you any money back, but I won't let it go to waste.
At least let somebody use it.
That's right.
That one I would say my first year's cask was good, but it basically set the groundwork that it walked so that last year's could run. But then last year, I think the timing worked a little bit of against us. We had just launched Triple Oak the month before.
Right.
It's really hard to
It's
kind
an
of
overlap.
double peak and get
Yeah.
the same whiskey riders and same people in the room. But actually, ever since it launched, sneakily, when I meet industry people that were able to try it, they're like, that was
Yeah,
good,
that was a
which
good one.
was great. Again, this
Well,
feedback.
I think you did a good job on this. This rye, the spiciness of the rye, the
Yeah.
vegetal character of the agave, and the sort of the pepperiness and stuff like that. I almost thought that it would, when you start thinking about things in your head,
Yep.
it's like I almost thought that it would be almost overly spicy
Yeah.
because of the two components. It
Uh,
is not.
well,
I'm
let
going to
me.
point that out. It is not, and that I think that's partly because of the virgin
Yeah.
oak gave off more of those maybe vanillins and stuff like that,
Well,
even with the
let me
tequila.
sneak in the one piece. You're 90% of the way there.
Okay, cool.
Um, because man, spice is what I've been talking about when I talk about this
Mm,
release. Not because it's an overly spicy release, but because spice was the throughput that we decided to. When I talk about just with the tawny kind of bridging the gap,
yeah,
we took the same approach to this one, but with a singular finishing cask and trying to procure literally the best, most world class tequila cask that I could. And when I say extra añejo, it was 4 years aged, not three. And when I say virgin, it was French oak, not American oak.
there you go.
And so spice being extra añejo, 4 years, tequila, honeyed, herbal spice, French oak spice. We don't need, we just talked about with
Right,
triple oak.
right.
So cinnamon, nutmeg, whatever. And then being intentional with putting rye whiskey into that rather than bourbon to play that earthy rye spice in there. And so even though I wouldn't call it an overly spicy release, in my mind, the spice characteristics were what allowed it to integrate so nicely. And then honestly, I think it's a nice on the sweeter side for rye
No,
because
I think it is on the sweeter side, and I think it's very homogenous.
yeah, because I get a lot of like honeyed character if I'm trying to really ham it up with, the tequila part saying like agave syrup or
Yeah,
something. But really I think it just has this wonderfully rounded
right.
spice profile that's nuanced and not overly bashing the job because it has all these components to it that just layer and integrate so well.
It's very homogenous. It's really,
Yeah.
I really like the way the flavor
Yeah.
profile goes. And I'll be honest with you. I'm not as crazy about a lot of the tequila finishes that are out there.
Which I'd heard
And,
from a lot of
I think
folks.
this one's done really well.
My last parent
And I'm not
company.
saying that because you're
That's
here.
fine. That's fine.
If I
That's
didn't
fine.
like it, I'd tell you.
I don't want anyone to blow smoke. So yeah, the my last parent company was essentially Jose Cuervo, and so I had played with many tequila casts over
Yep.
the course of my 7 years in Colorado. And so that's what gave me the confidence. This was probably the second project I laid down when I got to Angels Envy. And I agreed when I first put it out there, pretty much everyone in the room, or when I first suggested the idea, everyone in the room kind of just made this face at me.
Right.
Reason I found out later was that we'd actually tried to play with tequila before and it hadn't worked because we'd put normal Angel's Envy, by that I just mean 4.5, 5-year-old bourbon into normal Patron tequila casks in company and Bacardi. Didn't really turn out. But for me, because I'd already done all this work with extra añejo, with añejo, with reposado, with super high-end tequila barrels, with normal tequila barrels, so to speak, like I kind of knew what I was looking for.
Right.
And so again, as I got to know Angels Envy, as I got to know the other companies within Bacardi, our parent company, that's who I started calling up. And so I called up the master blender at Patron and said, "Look, I know we tried to put Angels Envy into your barrels. Apparently, cool. Like I'm not really looking for.
I'm the new guy and I want to do something different. And I'm going to take it. What do you got?
Well, yeah, pretty much what that was really the end question was, what do you got? But in the sense that, look, I'm not in any hurry. Like, what do you got later this year that you're proud of, that are your highest end releases that you think are cool? And he lobbed up a couple ideas. He had like a burgundy wine finish thing, and then he had his French oak thing. And I was like, holy shit, that sounds like what I want. And I waited 6-7 months, and then sure enough,
I can ask them because it was within company. What tequila do you use?
Piedra.
Really?
Grand Patron.
Yeah.
So obviously with like a port wine barrel, something like that, we're going to be buying that through a broker, right?
Right.
Bacardi doesn't own a port wine
exactly.
producer, so we have long-standing relationships with brokers.
No, Bacardi, get a port wine producer.
Yeah, yes. I don't know if that's what anybody wants right now, but
yeah, exactly.
But yeah, other spirit types, right? I was just purchasing some brandy barrels last year through a broker because we don't have that, which is fine. But every year, if I can do something in company, I will. And I don't know what you guys have Piedra priced at. It's in the hundreds of dollars mark. But because of French oak construction, because of extra añejo, 4 years aged, I would anticipate those would probably be like about $600 $1,500 barrels on the market through a broker. I paid $25 a barrel for them in company because I
Nice.
paid shipping
Well,
costs.
just as an aside, because I have some of the Bacardi people here, taking the Angels Envy barrels that are 4, 5, 6 years old and taking those barrels and shipping them back down to Patron to use those would be a good idea too. And
Well,
have an Angels Envy finished Patron.
as
All
you
right, I'm just leaving that out
as
there.
usual, you actually are further along the line than you'd think. Because guess what? I have a call on Monday with Patron if they want these barrels back.
Right, well, that's
Right? When
good. Full
you
circle.
talk about full circle, thinking
Right.
about bourbon barrels going there, I'm taking virgin barrels that were used in Mexico. I'm finishing in them, and then I'm asking if they want them back. And we've already done this with other product
That's
like
you should
rum
be.
and whatnot. And I'm working on it with the Irish and Scotch teams right now. So yeah, you're
All
ahead
right.
of it. You already got it. Um,
All right, because they're going to tell me I'm going to start running out of time, and I do want to get to the last couple things that we
okay,
got here.
yeah, let's move it.
I know you have other places to go, but
We
when
can
you
be late
start
to those. This is too much fun. We shouldn't be
when you start bringing me like
lab
lab
bottles.
bottles,
Yeah.
I want to taste it.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, we figured we'd bring a sneak peek of this year's cast strength and appreciate the plug on last year's having that unique aspect of having a smaller amount of tawny thrown in there. So again, back to what I was saying earlier about the storytelling around that and kind of moving into that world more. I was kind of thinking, how do I want to follow the one that we snuck Tawny into,
Right.
and what story am I telling around this one? And this is actually something I started working on 2 years ago because I knew I wanted to find. We've never done an age stated release before, and so I wanted to look into that territory. Like, how do
Okay.
again back to what I was saying earlier? How do I keep advancing our conversation? And so I wanted well, and it's funny because nowadays, right, you say, oh, there's shitty tequila barrels out there. I started working on this the tequila barrel one 2 years ago, and suddenly when I launched this, two other tequila finishes come out right around the same time. Granted, they were finished for shorter amounts of time,
Right.
and whatever
Exactly.
else. But this one I wanted to start working on 2 years ago because I wanted to have a conversation around age statements, and now freaking Jim Beam Black 7, Wild
Yeah.
Turkey
Exactly.
118, like all these age statements are all coming out. So it's feels like some zeitgeist type. All of
Yep.
us whiskey makers are kind of thinking the
You
same
have that
thing.
common. It's like
Yeah, the
the common
cloud,
consciousness,
whatever.
right?
So, but
The hive
I
mind.
still, yes, exactly. But I still want to, I think we can own this in the same way we talk about Triple Oak. We can own this and talk about age statements and how it pertains to us.
Okay.
And the conversation I want to have is that when I'm in the middle of the Reddit comment sections, when I'm reading all these things, I still see a lot of whiskey nerds and bourbon nerds with a high level of knowledge get age statements wrong as they apply to finishing casks. So hear me out. Basically, because there was a product that I worked on at my last distillery, it was 4-year-old single malt, and then it spent 4 more years in sherry barrels. And I was looking at the possibility of trying to age state that. And until relatively recently, age statement in the US was only time spent in the new oak barrel.
Correct.
And a lot of people think that's still the case, but in 2020, the TTB actually changed the regulations. And sneakily, I think a lot of people still don't realize that because I see wrong, like comment after comment after comment saying it wrong.
But here's the thing, though, too. I'm just going to point this out. Like, for a person who loves whiskey, and so this is my realm, right?
Yeah.
As long as you're not bottling it and stopping it, I count it.
Okay.
So if you're moving it off to another barrel and then
Yeah.
spending time in there, why shouldn't that count?
Right, and that was basically what was relayed to the TTB by several distilleries was like, look, you look anywhere else in the globe, your
Right.
time or your age is your total time in oak, and
Mhm.
we're actually putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage to Scotch, Irish. What? Yeah, sorry, I should have said 125 proof.
No. That was a flavor.
125 proof. I buried
No,
that
that's
lead
fine.
for the last couple of people, and I keep forgetting to do that.
No, I wasn't shocked at the
No,
proof.
no, you're good.
I like the flavor component.
And so basically it still is a gray area. Like I get it. It's not super simply cut.
Right.
Because this is an 8-year-old bourbon that has then spent 2 more years in port barrels.
Okay.
And so we're calling it Angel's Envy 10. But what we can't do, and I wouldn't do, is call this a 10-year-old bourbon because bourbon, they are correct in the comment section, is still the age is the time in the oak because that's what
Right.
bourbon is. But this is a 10-year-old whiskey. And that's what changed in 2020 was your total age statement could contribute to time.
So you're not going to put bourbon on the label.
We're still going to put Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey finished in port wine barrels, but we're not going to put 10-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey.
Okay.
So the couple ways you can address this, and again, I want to be transparent. I don't want to
Right.
feel
You're
like
not
I'm
trying to
pulling
fool.
one around.
Listen, you're not trying to fool anybody. It's still 10 years
Yeah.
in a barrel.
So you can call it Angel's Envy 10 in the same way Scotches will just put 10 after their distillery name, or you can on a separate line say age 10 years. but you can't have the 10 directly next to the bourbon,
Okay.
nor would I want to. And I think that's the conversation I want to have. In the same way, bottle and bond, I want to have a conversation of they read the label and say cash drink bottle and bond, what the hell? And then it's like, no, let's talk about it.
Let's
I
talk
want
about
to
it. It's
tell, I want
100.
to
It's
tell
still
you why.
100.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to
So
tell
we
you
made
why.
it.
And this one's, hey, this is our 10-year-old. This is our first age stated release. It owns it in a way that's unique to us because we're still the finished bourbon brand, right? We're the
Right.
pioneers of it. So why wouldn't we pioneer age statements as they pertain to finishing casks? And so that's what I think we'll have a fun conversation. And that's the plan I want to do around this. Just to back up of why it's in a lab bottle, this is our base blend. So this is about 100 barrels that we blended together.
Okay.
This is probably only about 90% of the way there. I mean, in an ideal world, I've nailed it on my first blend. But basically, I married all these barrels
Right.
together. Some of it's 9-year-old bourbon. Some of it's finished for the 9-year had a year or so in the port barrel. All of it took it across the 10-year threshold. And so those kind of make the components up. And then we'll do the final blend in mid-August, right before we bottle. And so I've married the base blend. This is all actually marrying back into ex-bourbon barrels through the summer. It's mellowing and just chilling. I expect a small drop in proof probably because of where we put it in the warehouses. But meanwhile,
because you're doing it for it to melt together. You're not doing it for actual
yeah,
any extra real aging. You just want
yeah,
it to really marry.
yeah. No, well, I know we're short on time, but I'll give you the insight into there was I just started at Angel's Envy, and 6 months into it, it was my first cast strength, and the packaging team came to me and said, "What's the proof on it?" And I was like,
I don't know yet.
I haven't even made it. What are you talking about?"
Right.
So up until that year, they had handwritten all the proofs, so they didn't
Right.
need to know it till the day it went in the bottle, or like pretty much writing
Yeah.
the labels out prior to that. That year, unbeknownst to me, they were printing it for the first time, and I was like, "Well, shit, what do I do?" Luckily, in Colorado, I had married things back into their base barrels and played around with that for a bit. And so in this case, I was like, actually, I think I can do a win-win. I think I can get them the proof. I can marry my barrels together. And in an ideal scenario, I'd have the stainless tanks that I could just put in stainless. The big places all do that.
Right.
Right. We didn't have that.
Oh.
But because, yeah, I have a tank that can hold that much, but I can't hold, that's our bottling tanks.
Right. Yeah. You
can't hold that up for
right.
2 days, let alone
Right. No, right.
3 to 6 months.
Right.
So I married it. In the case we did a cast strength rye that was small enough that I did actually have totes that I could marry it into, and that's what I did. But the first year, this was about 5 times bigger. And so I was like, what are my options? And I was like, I'm going to put it back in the bourbon barrels.
Yeah.
And actually, I really like that because it's a way to not really change the character. You're still back in your base
Right.
whiskey character, but you're allowing that marriage to take place, that kind of homogenation, that integration of flavor, right? And so that's what we're doing.
Now you can't count because you married them first. Could you count it?
I could still count it, but I'm not going to.
Okay.
We're already across 10. We're already across the 10 mark without
I'm
that.
thinking 10 plus.
Yeah. Angels Envy 10 plus.
Yeah. I like it. Angels Envy 10 plus.
But basically, long story short, we're going. So this is the base of it. And in the meantime, now that it's marrying for the next 3 months, I'm assembling other 10-year-old barrels that are either port bombs or oak bombs, high proof, low proof. And that's the salt and pepper that I'm going to do on my second blend. So I'm basically giving myself 2 cracks at it.
Nice.
This is blend 1.
Yeah.
There's a few things I want to do differently. I wanted to have a little bit longer finish. I think the marrying is going to actually
it's going to give you some
take
of
care
that.
of that.
It's
going to round it. But I'm going to have the last tools in my pocket for final blend day when it's do or die. Pencils down, tests over.
Yeah. At 90% done, you're doing very well.
And we used a lot of second fill port in this because normally with our cast strengths, or single barrel, certainly where it's 6 months or so, cast strengths I'll usually try to push up to a year. But when we're talking about first fill port, that can get a little dicey because that big red wine tannin can start fighting the oak tannins, especially when we're talking about older bourbons.
Mm-hmm.
This has a lot of 9-year-old in it, a lot of 8-year-old in it for this case, and even the last years have had those components too. But for this one, my purpose was, especially because it's older bourbon, I want to make sure that's even extra showcased. And the way to do that, to our earlier conversation, is to change your fill number. So this is about what's in your glass is about half first fill port and half second fill port.
Nice.
As a way to kind of keep that a little more subtle. Granted, at the end of the summer, I might make some decisions to amp that back up or dial it even further down. But those will be the calls we make at the last hour.
I think you're well on your way. On this one, I think that's going to be fantastic. I'm very much looking forward to the final product.
Yeah,
we are not going to taste it, but I just want to point out that we right now have the Lock and Keys single barrel, which we do pretty much every year with you guys. We actually used to do the blending, and we've gone to the single barrel blends, and stuff like that. We've gone to the single barrel. This last year was Avenging Angel.
Okay.
and that's what's available now. And I can tell you that we are down to I think less than 5 cases left of that.
Okay.
So that is almost gone. Bad news. Good news is Owen was here today. He brought me a bunch of samples, and I can tell you right now, we've picked the new one with Owen here today. We picked our new one. So the team is already asking me for the name. We'll give them that by the end of the day. I will have a name for you, and the new barrel is going to be done. And I'm very happy with our new pick too. And we've already tried this, so we lean a little bit heavier into your port finish, which
Yep.
I think differentiates
Yep.
Angel's Envy. So I think that's going to be fantastic, and everybody's sort of like that sort of route we've taken.
Yeah.
And this is a really good one, and I'm actually very excited about this one.
Yeah, it was really nice, buttery, kind of rounded
Yeah.
port. Like, sometimes those ports can express themselves with like a sharper tannin or red
Right,
wine one, and this one was just silky. So
silky
yeah.
smooth, and it's really, really nice. Listen, I know you got to go, but I really want to thank you,
Yeah.
Owen, for being with us today and to sort of going through this and telling us what's up with Angel's Envy.
Sure.
It's been fantastic, and I hope I can come down and see
It's
you
the
in
best
Kentucky.
one I've been on in a long, long time. Like, this has been so much fun. So yeah,
Thanks, bro.
we'll get you down in
All
Kentucky,
right,
man.
thank
We'll
you.
do it again.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm waiting for the hook, but I'll see everybody.
We just gotta hit the light.
This is going to be It's the Liquor Talking is going to be wherever you get your podcasts. Cousin Vinny will get it up there probably today if you do Spotify, if you do anything else, or you can come back and watch us on Facebook Live too. It's on the Julio's Liquors Facebook page. So thanks everybody for tuning in today. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody on Facebook. Bye everybody.